What is it that causes a person's sexual orientation? Before we get into the causes of sexual orientation, it's a good thing just to know how many straight, gay, and bisexual people there are out there. This is a hard thing to answer because not everyone is honest about their sexual orientation, sometimes even with themselves. When we simply ask people, are you gay, straight, or bisexual, we find that about 1.5% of both men and women label themselves as gay and lesbian in the United States, with an additional 2 to 2.5% labeling themselves as bisexual. But when we ask about same-gender sexual behavior, we find that about 10% of people say that they have had same-gender sex at some point in their adulthood. So clearly, identity and behavior don't always line up. When you ask gay men and lesbians what causes their sexual orientation, most will say that they didn't feel like they had any choice in the matter. In fact, most would say that they're born that way and knew from a very early age that they were either gay, lesbian, or bisexual. Latest estimates from national surveys find that about 88% of gay men said that they had no choice in the matter whatsoever, as well as about 68% of lesbians saying the same. This does indicate that women may have more sexual fluidity and choice in the matter of their sexual orientation. And this has been backed up by research showing that women are more likely throughout their lifetime to switch sexual orientations or to label themselves as bisexual or open to sexual relationships with both genders. Research over the past 2 to 3 decades in many fields has indicated that homosexuality is likely rooted in things that are well beyond a person's choice, such as their genetics and their prenatal exposure to hormones. Let's first tackle genes. If something is genetically caused, it tends to run in families, and homosexuality and bisexuality do exactly that. In fact, if you have a sibling who's gay, your chances of also being gay go up to about 10 to 12%. That might not seem like a lot, but given that in the general population, only about 1.5% of people are gay, that means that your odds actually go up about 5 to 6 times. And if you have an identical twin who's gay, a person who shares 100% of your genetics, your chances of being gay go up to 60 to 80%. That means that the heritability ratio of homosexuality falls somewhere along those lines of 60 to 80%. That's a higher heritability ratio than most things that people believe are well beyond their choice, such as whether or not they're right or left-handed. One way in which our genes affect our sexual orientation is in how they activate different hormones during our prenatal development, particularly with testosterone. Testosterone is known to have many effects on the brain and body. Of course, much of it determines whether we develop into a male or a female, with male fetuses typically being exposed to about 10 times the amount of testosterone in the womb as female fetuses. But this has also a big effect on the brain, especially the hypothalamus, which controls for such things as sexual behavior and aggression. One form of aggression that we can measure and find to differentiate, for example, gay men and straight men is a love of sports. Sports comprises of a safe form of aggression, namely competitiveness. And indeed, as indicating that gay men probably are exposed to lower levels of testosterone in the womb, we find that gay men are about half as likely to have enjoyed sports as children compared to their straight male counterparts. And indeed, the reverse is true for lesbians. We find that lesbians are about twice as likely to have enjoyed sports as children compared to their female counterparts. Testosterone levels are known to play a part in lots of childhood behavior. For example, children, whether or not they're boys or girls who are exposed to high levels of prenatal testosterone, tend to enjoy more competitive types of play, tend to show higher levels of visual spatial ability, and tend to show lower levels of verbal ability. Whereas fetuses, again, whether or not they're male or female, who have low exposure to testosterone, tend to show more imaginative verbal play and less competitive behavior. Well, we find that this is in line with what we see with gay male children and lesbian children. One study that assessed this directly was one where they had participants who were gay or straight, as well as male and female, bring in footage of themselves playing as children. They then took all this footage and for each participant randomly selected 30 seconds of it to show to a stranger. The stranger's task was simply to say whether or not they believed this child would grow up to be a gay or straight adult. Amazingly, just based off 30 seconds of behavior, these strangers were able to do this with better than chance odds. One of the ways they found that strangers could do this was simply by gauging the femininity or masculinity of the child's behavior. For boys who were rated as playing more femininely, for example, playing more verbally, more imaginatively, or less competitively, they were more likely to be voted as being gay later on in life, And again, these predictions turned out by and large to be true. Whereas for girls who were playing more competitively, less imaginatively, less verbally, these girls were more likely to be rated as being future lesbians. And these predictions turned out often to be true. When they surveyed the participants who supplied this footage, the participants themselves were very accurate in gauging their own masculinity or femininity as children. Their ratings of themselves matched up pretty much perfectly in line with those of strangers. What this shows is that the masculine and feminine behavior of children is not only very indicative of their later sexual orientation, but that oneself and others can easily clue in on this fact. While this doesn't mean that all boys who act prototypically feminine or all girls that act prototypically masculine are destined to become gay or lesbian, it does suggest that prenatal levels of testosterone not only affect childhood behavior, but later adult sexuality. In fact, many studies have found that actual prenatal levels of testosterone in the womb are very predictive of masculine versus feminine play styles in both boys and girls. There are many other indicators that prenatal levels of testosterone directly affect your sexual orientation. For example, prenatal levels of testosterone affect your basic build and height. And in fact, gay men tend to be on the shorter side compared to other men their age. Also, lesbians tend to be a bit taller and have a bit more muscle mass than other comparable women. One very accurate way of measuring your prenatal levels of testosterone are by measuring your finger digits. We in science tend to count digits starting with the thumb so that this is the first digit, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Those who are exposed to high levels of prenatal testosterone tend to have a longer fourth digit compared to their second digit. In other words, high levels of testosterone makes the ring finger grow quite a bit larger than the index finger. And that's what you find on most men. Those who are exposed to a low level of testosterone, as we find in most women, tend to have a ring finger that's about the same size as the index finger. It's best measured, by the way, by looking from the crease to the fingertip. What we find with gay men and lesbians is a reverse trend, so that gay men tend to have finger digits more in line with women, often having a ring finger that's the exact same size as the index finger, whereas lesbians show the opposite trend, often having a more pronounced ring finger than other comparable females. So it's clear that prenatal levels of testosterone are directly linked with human sexuality, and this doesn't surprise anyone that comes from the world of biology, particularly animal studies. In fact, studies as far back as the 1950s and 60s found that if you took rats and exposed them to high levels of testosterone, if they were female rats, they would tend to, when they grew up, be attracted to and have sex with other female rats. Whereas if you took young male fetuses and exposed them to testosterone suppressors, those male rats would grow up to be attracted to and primarily have sex with other male rats. This has actually been shown not only with rats and guinea pigs, but other higher order animals such as chimps. It might surprise you to know that homosexuality and bisexuality are very common in the animal kingdom. In fact, there are over 250 registered animals that show, in some proportion or another of their population, certain animals who only have sex with those of the same gender. This has been shown in elephants, flamingos, penguins, obviously rats and guinea pigs, and chimps. And usually the proportion of gay animals is about the same that we find in human populations, namely about 2 to 3%. With all this evidence that homosexuality is evolved and likely rooted in our genes, a potential danger is that in the near future, there could be genetic screeners for homosexuality. With this possibility, it could happen that when people get their babies tested in utero, if they found out that their baby, for example, had a gene linked with homosexuality or bisexuality, may choose to abort that baby due to that sexual orientation, or may put that child into reparative therapies so that they don't turn out gay. Now, it's unlikely that we'll have such genetic tests in the near future, given that homosexuality, as well as human sexuality in general, is likely caused by many genes in interaction with one another. In fact, after many decades of research, we have yet to discover any single gay gene, and it's unlikely that any such exist. But in the far future, such genetic screenings could become a possibility. Hopefully by that time, we as a culture will be enlightened enough to know that homosexuality and bisexuality are perfectly natural and just part of the spectrum of human sexuality.